Oakwood Country Club Saturday night. The air smells of lilies and the metallic tang of chilled champagne masking the rot underneath. My name is Louise, and in exactly 2 minutes, I am going to walk through these mahogany doors and destroy my own family. Inside, under the blinding crystal chandeliers, the man I loved is holding my sister's hand, celebrating an engagement built on a lie my parents helped construct. I was always the good daughter, the invisible foundation, but foundations crumble when the weight becomes too heavy to bear. Tonight the silence ends and the burning begins. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The sound of a hand striking a face is distinct. It doesn't sound like it does in the movies. In the movies, it's a heavy thud like a sandbag hitting concrete. In real life, inside a vaulted ballroom with crystal chandeliers and 200 people holding their breath, it sounds like a whip crack. It is a sharp, wet snap that echoes off the marble floors and high ceilings, silencing the string quartet instantly. My head snapped to the right, the force of the blow rattling my teeth. My cheek burned a radiating heat that spread instantly to my ear and down my neck, turning my skin into a map of humiliation. I stood there blinking, staring at the polished tips of Adam's dress shoes. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the untouched champagne flute of the woman standing next to me. I could feel the eyes, dozens of them, hundreds of them, boring into my back. They weren't looking at me with pity. They were looking at me with horror. Like I was the monster. Like I was the one who had ruined the perfect picture. I slowly lifted my hand to touch my face, my fingers trembling against the stinging skin. I looked up. Adam was standing there, his chest heaving, his face twisted into a mask of panic and rage I didn't recognize. And behind him, clutching her white dress, eyes wide and filled with a performance of terror, was my sister. To understand why I was standing in the middle of the Oakwood Country Club, being slapped by the man I thought I was going to marry, while my family watched and did nothing. You have to understand the Jonathans. You have to understand the lie we had all agreed to live. If you drove past our house in Silver Creek, you would think we had cracked the code to the American dream. It is one of those neighborhoods where the lawns aren't just cut, they are manicured into submission. It is the kind of place where people don't have arguments. They have quiet discussions behind double-paned glass while sipping imported wine. We lived in the colonial-style house with the white pillars, the least luxury SUVs in the driveway, and the annual Christmas card photo, where we all wore matching cashmere sweaters and smiled like we didn't have a care in the world. I was the good daughter. That was my role. I was the one who got the grades, the one who didn't sneak out, the one who went to the state college to save tuition, but still landed a corporate job at 22. I was dependable. I was the structural support beam of the family, essential weight-bearing, and completely invisible unless I started to crack. My job in marketing wasn't a passion, but it was respectable. It paid well enough to buy the clothes my mother approved of, and the car my father said was a smart asset. I was the safe bet. Then there was Emily. My little sister was the golden child. She was charming, beautiful, in that effortless, slightly messy way that makes people want to take care of her. While I was staying up late studying for finals, Emily was sneaking out to parties and getting caught by the cops, only for my dad to chuckle and call it spirited. While I was saving money from my first job to start a 401k, Emily was finding herself in Europe on my parents' credit card. She was the ornament. I was the foundation. And my parents, they were the curators of the museum. My mother, Patricia, treated life like a chess game, where the only way to win was to make sure your neighbors envied you. She didn't have friends, she had allies and competitors. My father, Robert, was a man who spoke exclusively in business metaphors. To him, children weren't people. We were investments. And lately, he had been looking at his portfolio with a lot of anxiety. I didn't see it then. I didn't see that the manicured lawn was hiding a foundation riddled with rot. I didn't notice the way Dad's hand shook when he opened the mail, or the way Mom would freeze when the phone rang, staring at the caller ID like it was a threatening message from a debt collector. I was too busy focusing on the one thing that made the pressure bearable. Adam. Adam and I had been together for 4 years. We met in my senior year of college. He was everything my parents wanted for me, which ironically was the only reason they tolerated him dating me instead of trying to set him up with someone flashier. He came from good stock old money, or at least old enough that it didn't smell like new paint. He worked in finance, wore tailored suits, and knew exactly which fork to use for the salad. But to me, he wasn't just a resume. He was safety. Adam was the person I went to when the pressure of being the good daughter felt like it was crushing my ribs. We used to sit in his car in my parents' driveway for hours, just talking about a future that belonged only to us. He would trace the line of my jaw with his thumb, promising me a life that wasn't about appearances. "We're going to get a place in the city," he'd promise. "No pillars, no lawns, just us. We'll get a dog that isn't a purebred. We'll be boring and happy Lou." He felt like home. A real home, not a showroom. My parents adored him. In fact, sometimes I felt like they loved him more than they loved me. When I brought him over for Sunday dinner's mandatory attendance, of course my dad would pour him the good scotch, the stuff he hid from his own brothers. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Adam," Dad would say, leaning back in his leather chair, the crystal glass catching the light. "You understand the value of long-term positioning, not like some of these kids today." Mom would just beam, looking back and forth between us. "You two are going to have such a wonderful life. Security is so important, Louise. You hold on to a man like that. You don't let opportunities like him slip away." Opportunities, not love, not partnership. To them, Adam was an asset class, and I was the broker who had secured the deal. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that having parents who loved my boyfriend was a blessing, not a burden. I ignored the way they looked at him, like a hungry wolf looks at a stray lamb, or perhaps like a drowning man looks at a life raft. But about 6 months before the night at the country club, the texture of things started to change. It wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a slow erosion. It started with the money talk. Sunday dinners became tense. My father stopped joking. He spent the meals complaining about market volatility and sharks in the water. He'd look at me, then at Adam, with a desperation I couldn't place. "You have to be smart," he'd say, stabbing his steak a little too hard. "You have to secure your position before the tide turns. You can't be sentimental in this economy." Mom started making comments that felt like little pinpricks. "You're not getting any younger, Louise," she said one afternoon while I was helping her arrange flowers for a charity gala I wasn't invited to. "Adam is hitting his prime. Men like him, they get noticed. You need to lock that down. Why haven't you pushed for a ring?" "I don't want to push him, Mom," I said, cutting a stem. "We're happy." "Happy doesn't pay the mortgage," she snapped. It was so sharp, so bitter that I stopped and looked at her. For a second, her mask slipped. She looked tired. She looked terrified. Then she blinked and the Stepford smile was back. "I just want you to be secure, darling. For the family." For the family. That phrase. I had sacrificed so much for that phrase. I had stayed local for college for the family. I had taken the safe job for the family. I had loaned Emily money I knew I'd never see again for the family. And while the pressure at home was mounting, Adam was drifting. It was subtle at first. He started working late. The texts became shorter. The "I love yous" became reactive, not proactive. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd sigh, rubbing his temples. "I'm just building our future, Lou," he'd say. "I'm doing this for us. Your dad, he's right. The market is unstable. I need to make sure we're set." He started spending more time at my parents' house even when I wasn't there. I'd come home from work to find his car in the driveway. He'd be in the study with Dad looking over papers, or in the kitchen laughing with Emily and Mom. It felt weirdly like I was being erased from my own relationship. "We were just talking about investment strategies," Emily would say with a little smirk, hopping off the counter when I walked in. She'd brush past Adam, her hand lingering on his arm just a second too long. "Adam is so smart. You're lucky, Lou." I brushed it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that Adam getting along with my family was a good thing. I didn't realize that they were forming a circle, a closed loop, and I was standing on the outside. The foreshadowing was there written in neon lights, but I refused to read it. I remember one night vividly. It was a Tuesday. I had come over to cook dinner for Adam at his apartment, trying to bridge the distance growing between us. He was barely eating, scrolling through emails on his phone. "My dad asked about you today," I said, trying to start a conversation. "He said you guys are working on something exciting." Adam froze. He didn't look up. "Just some portfolio advice. He's in a bit of a tight spot, Lou. He respects my opinion." "Is everything okay with their money?" Adam finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. "Your parents are survivors, Louise. They'll do whatever it takes to stay afloat. You should admire that." "I do," I said, confused. "Do you—" He put his fork down. "Sometimes I wonder if you have the stomach for it. The real world. It's not about being good, Lou. It's about winning. It's about not being the one left holding the bag." I didn't know what he meant then. I thought he was stressed. I thought he was just venting about work. I didn't know that I was the bag he was planning to drop. I didn't know that my parents, my sister, and the love of my life were already drafting the blueprints for a life that didn't include me. I was sleepwalking toward a cliff edge, convinced that the people holding my hand were keeping me safe. But they weren't holding my hand. They were just waiting for the right moment to push. And that moment was coming faster than I could have ever imagined. The end of us didn't sound like a collision. It sounded like a slow leak, a hiss of air escaping a tire until you're left driving on the rim, grinding metal against asphalt. In the weeks leading up to the end, Adam became a ghost in his own life. He didn't stop coming over, but he stopped arriving. His body would be on my couch, his eyes fixed on the television or his phone, but the person I loved was somewhere else. Plans started to dissolve with flimsy excuses. A dinner reservation we'd made a month ago was canceled because he was swamped. A weekend trip to the coast was scrapped because he needed to recharge. I became a master of rationalization. I told myself that high-pressure jobs require high-pressure sacrifices. I told myself that being a supportive partner meant absorbing his silence without complaint. So I tried harder. I became a caricature of the perfect girlfriend. I cooked his favorite meals, elaborate dishes, that took 3 hours to prepare only for him to pick at them and say he wasn't hungry. I cleaned his apartment while he was at work, leaving notes on his pillow that I knew he barely read. I made myself smaller, quieter, easier to digest, terrified that if I made a single demand he would shatter. The breakup, when it finally came, was insulting in its gentleness. It was a Tuesday evening, raining, the kind of weather that makes the world feel gray and closed in. He sat on the edge of my bed, refusing to take off his coat, staring at his hands like they didn't belong to him. He didn't scream, he didn't fight. He just looked at me with this pitying, soft expression that made my stomach turn. "I just don't know who I am anymore, Lou," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I feel like I'm drowning in expectations. I need to figure out what I want without an audience." He reached out and touched my knee, a gesture that felt more like a doctor delivering a diagnosis than a lover saying goodbye. "You deserve someone who is all in. You deserve someone who doesn't have one foot out the door. I can't give you what you need right now." He framed it as a mercy killing. He was leaving me for my own good. He was the martyr falling on the sword of his own confusion so I could be free. I cried, of course. I begged. I asked him if there was someone else, and he looked me dead in the eye without blinking and said, "This isn't about anyone else. This is about me needing to be alone." I believed him. I believed him because the alternative was too painful to consider, and because Adam had always been the honest one, the safe one. If I expected my family to rally around me to offer a fortress of support while I licked my wounds, I was delusional. The Sunday dinner following the breakup was a study in cold disappointment. My mother didn't hug me when I walked in. She looked at my puffy eyes and sighed as if my grief was a stain on her upholstery. We sat in the dining room, the silence stretching tight enough to snap a violin string. My father carved the roast with aggressive, jagged motions. "I just don't understand it," Mom said finally, setting her fork down with a sharp clatter. "Adam was perfect. He was stable. What did you say to him, Louise? Men don't just leave a good situation unless they're pushed." "I didn't say anything, Mom," I whispered, staring at my plate. "He said he needed space." "Space?" my father scoffed. "Men like stability, Louise. They like predictability. If he left, it's because he sensed chaos. You must have been too demanding. Or too emotional." They were annoyed. Not heartbroken for me, but annoyed at me. I had lost the asset. I had fumbled the merger. Emily was the only one who didn't attack me, but her behavior was unnerving in a different way. She sat across from me, picking at her salad, her eyes darting between me and her phone. She was supportive, but it felt rehearsed, like she was reading lines from a script she hadn't fully memorized. "Maybe he just needs time, Lou," she said, her voice unusually high. "He's under a lot of pressure at work. The merger with the chaotic timeline, he told me it was—" She stopped. I looked up. "When did he tell you about the merger timeline?" I asked. Emily froze, then shrugged a quick, jerky motion. "Oh, just back when we were all hanging out, weeks ago. I'm just saying, don't be too hard on him. He's a good guy. He's just confused." She defended him with a fervor that felt out of place, acting more like his PR representative than my sister. But I was too steeped in misery to connect the dots. I just nodded, grateful for any scrap of kindness, even if it felt synthetic. The next few months were a blur of reconstruction. I threw myself into the American individualist cure for heartbreak self-improvement. I started seeing a therapist who told me I had an overdeveloped sense of responsibility for others' emotions. I joined a gym. I cut my hair, chopping off the long, heavy waves Adam had loved into a sharp, angular bob that made me look harder, less yielding. I moved out of the apartment I had shared with a roommate and leased a small studio downtown. It wasn't a colonial with pillars. It was a converted warehouse with exposed brick and drafty windows. But it was mine. I started to build an identity that wasn't tethered to being Adam's girlfriend or the Jonathan's disappointing daughter. I was breathing again. The air was thin, but it was clear. I thought I was moving on. I thought the worst part was over: the loneliness, the rejection, the silence. I didn't know that the silence was just the pullback before the tsunami. The text message that ruined my life arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I was at work, sitting in a glass-walled conference room waiting for a meeting to start. My phone buzzed against the mahogany table. I glanced down. It was a text from my mother. The preview popped up on the screen, clear as day. "Mom, remember, do not put Louise on the chaotic guest list email thread. I cannot handle her drama right now. We tell her after the party on Saturday." My heart stopped. It didn't speed up. It literally stopped, a hollow pause in the center of my chest. I stared at the words, the pixels swimming before my eyes. Guest list, party. My thumb hovered over the screen. I knew in that instinctual animal part of my brain that I shouldn't open it. I knew that whatever was on the other side of that notification was going to erase the person I was. But I opened it anyway. I clicked the notification, but the text was gone, deleted. A second later, a new text appeared. "Mom. Sorry, wrong person. Just planning a surprise for your dad's work thing. Lies." My mother was a meticulous planner. She didn't make guest list mistakes for work functions, and she certainly didn't hide them from me. A cold, ringing numbness started in my ears. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone down flat on the table to type. I didn't reply to her. Instead, I went to the digital trail I had been ignoring for months. I opened Instagram. I had blocked Adam and Emily, rarely posted, but I went to the tagged photos of my sister. And there it was, posted 3 minutes ago by a local wedding photographer, a sneak peek of a session. It was a photo taken in a sunlit field, the kind of golden hour shot that screams romance. Adam was on one knee. He was wearing the suit I had helped him pick out for his brother's wedding. He was holding a ring box, a velvet box that looked sickeningly familiar. And standing there, hands over her mouth in feigned shock, wearing a white sundress, was Emily. The caption read, "She said yes, so excited to capture the engagement of these two soulmates. Love wins, future Mr. and Mrs. the Jonathans." The air left the room. The glass walls of the conference office seemed to tilt. I felt a physical blow to my gut, a nausea so sudden and violent I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from sliding out of my chair. Engagement. Adam and Emily. The math crashed into my brain like a pile-up on the highway. We had been broken up for 4 months. You don't get engaged to your ex-girlfriend's sister in 4 months unless you were building that bridge while you were still standing on the old one. The late nights, the confusion, Emily defending him, my parents' annoyance at me. It all slotted into place a horrifying mosaic of betrayal. They weren't just dating, they were getting married. And everyone knew. The photographer knew. My parents knew. I stood up. I walked out of the conference room, ignoring my boss who was just walking in. I went to the bathroom, locked the stall door, and dialed my mother. She picked up on the second ring, her voice tight. "Louise, did you get my text? I told you it was just—" "I saw the photo, Mom," I said. My voice sounded strange, robotic. The photographer tagged Emily. There was a silence on the other end. A long, heavy silence. Then a sigh. Not a gasp of guilt, but a sigh of inconvenience. "Well," she said, her tone shifting from panic to a chilly resolve. "I suppose it's out now. We were going to tell you, Louise. We were just waiting for the right time." "The right time?" I choked out a laugh bubbling up in my throat that sounded like a sob. "He's my ex-boyfriend, Mom. My sister is marrying my ex-boyfriend. And you knew you're helping them." "Lower your voice," she hissed. "You are exactly why we didn't tell you. We knew you'd react like this. We knew you'd make it all about you." "About me?" I gripped the phone so hard the plastic case creaked. "How is this not about me? You're throwing them an engagement party, this Saturday, and you weren't going to invite me." "We didn't invite you to keep the peace," she said, her voice dropping into that condescending register she used when I was a child. "Adam and Emily deserve to be happy. They deserve one night, just one night, where they don't have to deal with your judgment or your jealousy. It's a delicate situation, Louise. We just wanted a peaceful night for the family." "I am the family," I whispered. "Then act like it," she snapped. "If you care about this family, you will stay away. You will let your sister have her moment. Don't cause a scene, Louise. You'll only embarrass yourself." She hung up. I stood in the bathroom stall, staring at the tiled wall. The gaslighting was breathtaking in its audacity. They had framed my exclusion not as a betrayal, but as a necessary containment measure. I was the volatile element. I was the threat. They had rewritten reality so that their deception was actually a form of protection, protecting their happiness from my drama. I felt the grief wash over me, a tidal wave of sorrow for the sister I thought I had, the boyfriend I thought loved me, the parents I thought protected me. But as the wave receded, it left something else behind, something hard and hot and sharp. Rage, pure clarifying rage. They wanted peace. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to pretend that I didn't exist, so they could play house in their perfect manicured world. They thought I would stay away because I was the good daughter. They thought I would swallow this poison to save them from looking bad. They were banking on my shame. They were banking on my silence. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and dark. I didn't look like the good daughter anymore. I looked like someone with nothing left to lose. I wasn't going to stay away. I wasn't going to let them toast to their lies in peace. I was going to that engagement party. The Mr. Balin-style dread crept into my mind, then a cold whisper in the back of my skull. I thought I knew the extent of the betrayal. I thought the engagement was the secret. But as I stared at my reflection, a dark realization began to form a hunch based on Dad's panic about money and Adam's sudden exit. There was something else. This wasn't just about love or lust. You don't swap sisters like trading cards just because of passion. There was a rot here deeper than infidelity. I didn't have the proof yet, but I knew I would find it. I washed my face, I reapplied my lipstick. I walked back out into the office. I had 2 days until Saturday. 2 days to find a dress that looked like armor. 2 days to bury the girl they thought they could throw away and become the woman who would burn their house down. They didn't want to invite me, fine. I would invite myself, and I would bring the truth with me. Getting ready for the engagement party felt less like dressing for a celebration and more like ritualistically donning armor for battle. I didn't choose the black dress, which would have looked like mourning, or the red dress, which would have screamed desperation. I chose a floor-length midnight blue silk gown I had bought for a gala Adam and I were supposed to attend next month. It was elegant, severe, and cold. It fit like a second skin, requiring perfect posture just to zip up. I pulled my hair back into a tight, low chignon, exposing the sharp line of my jaw and the neck that Adam used to kiss. I applied my makeup with surgical precision, sharp-winged eyeliner, matte skin, no blush. I wasn't going there to look flushed or emotional. I was going there to look like a statue of judgment. My friend Sarah sat on the edge of my bed, watching me with a mixture of awe and terror. She had agreed to drive me to be the getaway car, but she had pleaded with me for an hour to stay home. "They're going to eat you alive, Lou," she had said. "This is their turf. You're walking into a shark tank." I turned from the mirror, smoothing the cold silk over my hips. "I know," I said, my voice steady in a way that scared even me. "But sharks don't like it when you bleed in the water. They like it when you thrash. I'm not going to thrash Sarah. I'm going to drain the tank." The drive to the Oakwood Country Club was silent. The Pennsylvania hills rolled by in the twilight shadows, stretching long and dark across the road. When we pulled up to the valet stand, the venue was glowing like a lantern against the night sky. It was the quintessential American luxury dream, white pillars bathed in uplighting, a fleet of German sedans shimmering in the driveway, the muffled sound of a string quartet drifting through the open mahogany doors. It was the world I was raised in, the world I was supposed to inherit, and tonight it looked like a fortress built to keep me out. I told Sarah to keep the engine running near the exit. I stepped out, my heels clicking sharply on the pavement. The valet boy, a teenager who looked about 17, scrambled to take a ticket I didn't have. I breezed past him. The check-in table was manned by 2 women with clipboards and headsets, the gatekeepers of suburbia. They looked up as I approached, their smiles faltering when they didn't recognize me as an invited guest. "Name?" one asked, her pen hovering. "Louise Jonathan," I said, not breaking stride. "I'm the sister of the bride." The girl blinked, confused, flipping through her pages. I don't see a Louise on the list, Ms. Jonathan. I'll have to check with—" "Don't bother," I said, pushing past the velvet rope before she could physically stop me. "I'm sure it was just an oversight." I walked into the ballroom, and the scent hit me first: expensive perfume lilies and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. The room was bathed in golden light from crystal chandeliers the size of small cars. There were at least 200 people there. My parents' friends, Adam's colleagues, people from the church, people I had known my entire life. They stood in clusters, laughing, drinking, celebrating the union of 2 great families. I felt like a ghost, an intruder in my own history. I stood near the entrance for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. Then I saw them. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais, my parents were holding court. My father, Robert, looked triumphant, holding a glass of scotch, one hand clapping a man on the back. My mother, Patricia, was glowing, her anxiety hidden beneath layers of foundation and hairspray. And between them, looking like royalty, were Adam and Emily. Emily was laughing, her head thrown back, her hand resting possessively on Adam's chest. Adam looked relieved. He looked like a man who had successfully pulled off a heist. I started walking. I didn't rush. I cut a straight line through the crowd. The murmur of conversation died down in waves as I passed. People turned cups halfway to their mouths, their eyes widening. Is that... I thought she wasn't coming. Oh my God, look at her face! The whispers hissed around me like steam. I kept my eyes locked on the dais. My mother saw me first. Her smile didn't just fade, it shattered. Her eyes went wide and she grabbed my father's arm so hard his drink sloshed over the rim. Dad looked up, his face reddening instantly with a mix of anger and panic. They rushed down the steps of the dais to intercept me, moving with the frantic speed of a bomb squad trying to contain an explosion. They met me in the center of the dance floor, creating a physical barrier between me and the happy couple. "Louise!" My mother hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that barely moved her lips. "What the hell are you doing here? You are ruining this." "I'm just here to congratulate the happy couple, Mom," I said, my voice loud enough to carry to the nearest table. "Get out!" my father growled, stepping into my personal space using his size to try and intimidate me. "You turn around and walk out those doors right now, or I will have security drag you out. Do not test me, Louise." "I wouldn't do that, Dad," I said calmly. "Security dragging your daughter out of your son-in-law's engagement party? That sounds like the kind of scene that ends up on the evening news, or at least the HOA Facebook page." I stepped around him. "Adam, Emily," I called out. The music had stopped. The string quartet had wisely lowered their bows. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Adam and Emily froze. Emily looked terrified, shrinking behind Adam's shoulder. Adam straightened his tie, his jaw clenching. He decided to play the role of the protective patriarch. He stepped down from the dais and walked toward me, meeting me in the center of the room. My parents flanked him, forming a wall. "Louise," Adam said, his voice smooth, reasonable, the voice he used for clients. "This isn't the place. You're upset. We get it. But you need to leave." "I'm not upset, Adam," I said, reaching into my clutch. "I'm actually very clear-headed. I just have a few questions before I go, since we're all family here." "No," Emily squeaked from the stage. "Lou, please don't." I turned to the room, addressing the guests who were watching with rapt, horrified attention. "It's a beautiful story, isn't it?" I asked, my voice ringing out clear and steady. "Childhood sweethearts, or well, close enough. Adam and I were together for 4 years. We talked about marriage, we looked at houses, and then 4 months ago he needed space. He needed to find himself. And now here he is engaged to my little sister." I turned back to Adam. "So I'm just curious, Adam, for the sake of the timeline, when did you stop finding yourself and start finding my sister? Was it before or after you broke up with me in my bedroom?" Adam stepped forward, his face darkening. "It happened after..." He lied loud and firm. "Emily and I connected over our shared grief about the breakup. It was unexpected. It was innocent." "Innocent," I repeated. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my clutch. "That's interesting, because I have a receipt here from the Palmer House Hotel in Chicago, dated September 12th. That was 3 weeks before you broke up with me. You told me you were at a finance conference in D.C., but the reservation is under your name, and the room service for 2, charged to the card ending in 4590. That's your corporate card, Adam." A gasp rippled through the room. Someone in the back actually said, "Oh, damn." Adam's face went pale. "That proves nothing," he stammered. "I met a colleague." "A colleague?" I pulled out a second piece of paper. "I also have a printout of a Venmo transaction from that same weekend, from you to Emily. The memo just says, 'Chicago parking.' Did your colleague drive my sister's car to Chicago?" "Adam?" Emily burst into tears. My mother lunged for the papers, snatching them from my hand. "Enough!" she shrieked. "This is private. You are sick, Louise. You are twisting things." "Am I?" I looked at my father. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his shoes, sweating. And that was when I dropped the real bomb. The one that wasn't about sex or betrayal, but about the currency that actually mattered in this room: money. "But the cheating isn't the worst part, is it, Dad?" I said, shifting my focus to him. "See, I couldn't figure out why you were so okay with this. Why you, the man who preaches loyalty and family values, would let your younger daughter marry the man who broke your older daughter's heart. It didn't make sense. Until I looked at the public records for Jonathan Logistics. My father's head snapped up. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "Louise, stop," he warned, his voice shaking. "Don't you say another word." "Jonathan Logistics has been insolvent for 6 months, I announced to the room. "Dad, you leveraged the house, the cars, everything. You were drowning. You needed a bailout. And who was there, Adam?" I turned back to Adam. Adam, who comes from a trust fund that vests when he marries. Adam, who needed a wife to access his capital, but who found me. What was it? Too difficult. Too independent. I asked too many questions about your business trips, didn't I? But Emily doesn't ask questions. Emily is happy to just be on the arm of a successful man. I looked at my mother. You didn't choose Emily because she was a better match. You chose her because she was a better pawn. You traded me in. You let Adam swap sisters so he could get his trust fund and you could get your bailout. You sold me out for a bridge loan. The room was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. My accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just a family spat anymore. It was an indictment of their entire existence. I had exposed the financial rot beneath the luxury veneer. I had shown everyone that the emperor wasn't just naked. He was broke and selling his children. Adam looked around the room. He saw the looks on his colleagues' faces, disgust, calculation, judgment. He saw his reputation crumbling in real time. He looked at me, and the mask fell away completely. There was no suave banker left. There was just a cornered, vicious animal. "You jealous, bitter bitch," he spat, stepping into my face. "You think anyone cares? You're pathetic. You were always pathetic. That's why I left. You're boring, Louise. You're a grind. Emily is 10 times the woman you are because she knows how to stand by a man instead of trying to destroy him. Now get the hell out of my party." He reached out and shoved my shoulder hard. I stumbled back a step, but I regained my balance. I looked him in the eye, calm, detached, and delivered the line I had practiced in the mirror, the line that I knew would break him. "I'm not the one who needs a trust fund to pay my rent, Adam," I said quietly. "And I'm not the one who had to buy a wife to save my father-in-law's business. You didn't just cheat on me, you traded me like a depreciating asset. You're not a man, Adam. You're just a line item on my father's ledger." That was it. The snap. Adam's hand moved faster than I could track. The slap connected with the side of my face with a force that spun me halfway around. The sound was sickening, a wet, loud crack that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. My vision blurred for a second. My ear rang with a high-pitched whine. I stumbled, catching myself on a high-top table, knocking a glass of champagne to the floor where it shattered. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of shock. Violence. Physical, ugly violence in the middle of the Oakwood Country Club. I stood there, hand to my cheek, feeling the heat rise. I tasted blood in my mouth. I slowly turned back to face him. Adam was breathing hard, his hands still raised slightly, his eyes wide as if he couldn't believe he had actually done it. Behind him, Emily screamed a short, sharp sound and covered her mouth. My mother looked like she was going to faint. My father was frozen, staring at Adam with horror, not because he hit me, but because he had done it in public. A phone flashed, then another. I looked around. People were holding their phones up, recording. The video of Adam, the groom-to-be, the successful financier backhanding his ex-girlfriend at his engagement party, was already being uploaded to the cloud. A man in a tuxedo, one of Adam's older partners, stepped forward from the crowd, his face grim. He put a hand on Adam's chest and pushed him back. "That is enough, son," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are done. Step back." Adam blinked, looking around as if waking up from a trance. "She provoked me," he stammered, pointing at me. "You heard her? She—" "Shut up," the partner said. "Just shut up." I straightened my dress. I wiped the trickle of blood from the corner of my lip with the back of my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked at Adam, then at my parents, then at Emily. I let the silence stretch until it was agonizing. I wanted everyone to memorize this tableau: the abusive groom, the complicit parents, the coward sister, and the daughter they couldn't break. "Thank you," I said. My voice was raspy, but it carried to the back of the room. "Thank you for showing everyone exactly who you are. Now I don't have to explain why I'm not part of this family anymore." I turned my back on them. I started walking toward the doors. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one touched me. No one whispered. They just watched with a mixture of awe and fear. I reached the mahogany doors and paused. I turned back one last time. My father was staring at me, his face gray, realizing that the loan wasn't going to save him now. Not with the scandal that was about to erupt. "Oh, and Dad," I called out. "You might want to check your email. I think the bank's fraud department has some questions about those loan applications." I wouldn't wait for the sheriff to show up at the house. It would look bad for the neighbors. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cool night air. The valet kid was staring at me, mouth open. I walked past him to where Sarah's car was idling at the curb. I got in, closed the door, and locked it. "Drive," I said. As we pulled away, I looked back at the glowing country club one last time. It didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a burning building. And I was the one holding the match. The morning after you detonate a nuclear bomb in the center of your life, the silence isn't peaceful, it's heavy. I woke up in my studio apartment with the sun cutting through the blinds like a laser. For a split second in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness, I forgot. I reached for my phone to check the time, expecting the usual dry notifications from work or a weather alert. Then I moved my jaw, and the pain hit me, a dull, throbbing ache that radiated from my cheekbone to my temple. I touched my face. The skin felt tight, hot, and foreign. I rolled out of bed and walked to the bathroom mirror. The bruise was already blooming, a violent watercolor of purple and sickly yellow spreading across my left cheek. It was the physical receipt of the transaction that had occurred last night. I stared at it, touching the edges gingerly. It looked ugly, but strangely, it didn't make me feel ashamed. It made me feel validated. For years, the pain in this family had been invisible. Emotional cuts, psychological pressure, financial gaslighting. Now finally, the ugliness was on the outside, where everyone could see it. I walked back to my nightstand and picked up my phone. The screen was a wall of notifications. Missed calls from my mother, 14 of them. Missed calls from my father, 2. Texts from Emily, none. But the real flood came from the apps I hadn't opened. Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. The red bubbles were counting up into the hundreds. I sat on the edge of my bed, took a breath, and unlocked the screen. The video was everywhere. It had been posted by someone I didn't even know, a friend of a friend who had been at the party. The caption was simple: "Finance bro slaps ex-girlfriend at his own engagement party. You can't make this up. Had Oakwood CC and hard trash." I pressed play. The footage was shaky, vertical shot from behind a centerpiece. I watched myself looking tall and severe in my midnight blue dress. I heard my voice clear and cutting, listing the dates, the hotel charges, the financial fraud. Then I saw Adam. I saw the way his face contorted, the way he lunged. The slap was loud even through the tinny phone speakers. The camera jerked as the room reacted, capturing the collective gasp, the sudden swarm of bodies. I watched it 3 times. It felt like watching a stranger, a heroine in a movie I hadn't realized I was starring in. The comments were a landslide. In the court of public opinion, the verdict was swift and brutal. Imagine hitting a woman in public and thinking you're the victim. Who is this guy? Tag his employer. The family standing there doing nothing is the scariest part. Of course, there were the detractors, the internet trolls who asked what I had said to provoke him or why I was there in the first place. But they were drowning in a sea of support. People I hadn't spoken to in high school were sliding into my DMs. "I saw the video, Lou. I'm so sorry." I always knew there was something off about him. The curated narrative my parents had spent 30 years building, the perfect Jonathans, the pillars of the community, had been dismantled in 45 seconds of 1080p footage. My phone buzzed again, a voicemail from my mother. I didn't delete it. I listened to it on speaker, setting the phone on the counter while I made coffee. Her voice was shrill, bordering on hysterical. "Louise, pick up the phone. Do you have any idea what you've done? The club is threatening to revoke our membership. Your father's partners are calling. You need to issue a statement saying you were drunk or that it was a misunderstanding. You have to fix this. We are drowning here and it is all your fault." I took a sip of coffee black. Fix this. That was always the mandate. Fix the image. Smooth the edges. Hide the bodies. But I wasn't the fixer anymore. I was the evidence. I saved the voicemail. Then I blocked her number. I blocked my father's number. I didn't block Emily's, though, not yet. I spent the next hour doing something that felt incredibly American and incredibly necessary. I engaged with the legal system. I didn't want Adam in jail. I knew that a single slap, even a public one, rarely resulted in hard time for men in his tax bracket with no priors. But I wanted a paper trail. I drove to the police station wearing sunglasses to hide the bruise until I was in the interview room. I filed a report for simple assault. The officer, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, took photos of my face. She watched the video on my phone, her expression grim. "We can issue a summons," she said. "And I'd recommend a temporary restraining order. If he shows up at your work or your apartment, we can pick him up." "Do it," I said. I want it on record. The TRO wasn't just for safety, it was a strategic nuke. In the world of finance, a restraining order is a red flag that compliance departments can't ignore. By the time I walked out of the station holding a copy of the report, I knew Adam's career was on a ventilator. And sure enough, by noon, his firm's LinkedIn page had restricted comments. A source on a local business forum claimed he had been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. My father's business wasn't faring much better. The accusation of fraud I'd shouted at the party hadn't just been dramatic flavor. It was a loose thread that people were starting to pull. I saw a post from a local real estate agent asking if anyone else had had irregularities with Jonathan Logistics. The dominoes weren't just falling, they were accelerating. But the hardest part wasn't the legal battle or the online spectacle. It was walking into my own office on Monday. I worked at a mid-sized marketing firm, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business. I had considered calling in sick, hiding under the covers until the heat died down, but that felt like shame, and I was done with shame. I put on a blazer, applied concealer that didn't quite cover the yellowing bruise, and walked in. The silence when I entered the open-plan office was immediate. Heads turned, typing stopped. I kept my chin up, walking straight to my desk. I could feel the whispers, the Slack messages flying back and forth. "Did you see her face? Is that the girl from the video?" About an hour in, Sarah, the VP of operations, a woman who usually terrified me, stopped by my desk. She didn't ask for a file. She didn't ask about the quarterly projections. She leaned down, resting her hand on the edge of my desk, and looked me in the eye. "If you need time," she said quietly, "take it. And if he tries to contact you here, you send him to me. Security has his photo." She didn't ask what I did to deserve it. She didn't ask for the gossip. She just offered a shield. I felt a lump form in my throat, hot and tight. "Thank you," I whispered. "I'm okay." "You don't have to be," she said, straightening up. "Just get the work done." It was the most empowering thing anyone had said to me in months. It was a reminder that I had value outside of my role as a daughter or a girlfriend. I had a community here built on respect and competence, not blood and obligation. That evening, I went to a support group. It was something I had signed up for weeks ago, but never attended a generic life transitions circle that met in a church basement. I walked in feeling raw and exposed. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't tell the whole saga. I just said, "My ex hit me on Saturday. My family blames me, and I think I'm finally free." I looked around the circle and saw heads nodding. I saw eyes that held the same haunted, exhausted look I saw in the mirror. A woman named Maria came up to me afterward. "The first time is the hardest," she said. "Walking away feels like dying, but it's actually being born." I realized then that betrayal isn't a unique curse. It's a shared language. I wasn't alone in the dark. I was just the newest member of a club no one wants to join, but everyone fights to survive in. Late that night, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't have saved. It was Emily. "Emily. He's really angry, Lou. He's drinking a lot. He says you ruined his life. Mom is crying nonstop. Dad is talking to lawyers about suing you for defamation. I don't know what to do." I stared at the screen. The old Louise, the good daughter, would have called her back immediately. I would have offered to fix it, to soften the blow, to tell her how to manage Adam's temper. I felt the pull of that old habit, the muscle memory of caretaking. But then I touched my cheek. I remembered the way Emily had stood behind him silent while he berated me. I remembered the Venmo receipts. She was a victim now, yes, trapped in a house with a violent man and collapsing parents, but she was also a volunteer. She had bought the ticket for this ride, knowing it was paid for with my heartbreak. I typed back, "If you are unsafe, call the police. If you want to leave him, I can give you the number for a shelter, but I cannot save you from the choices you made. I can't be your shield anymore, Em. I'm barely holding my own up." I sent it. I didn't block her, but I muted the conversation. I couldn't drag her out of the fire if she was still holding on to the matches. The next day, the defamation threat came. A cease and desist letter from a lawyer representing my father emailed to my work address. It demanded I retract my statements about the fraud and issue a public apology for the staged altercation. It was laughable. You can't stage a bruise like this. And truth is the absolute defense against defamation. But it showed me their strategy scorched earth. They were willing to sue their own daughter to protect the dwindling assets they had left. I had a choice. I could go nuclear. I had more dirt. I knew about my father's offshore accounts. I knew about the corners Adam cut on his compliance exams. I could go to the tabloids. I could turn this into a serialized destruction of the Jonathan and Miller families. It would be satisfying. It would feel like justice. But as I sat in my studio watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon light, I realized that revenge wasn't the goal. Freedom was. If I spent the next year in a mudslinging war with them, I was still tethered to them. I was still playing their game, just on the other side of the board. I decided to take control of the narrative, but on my terms. I didn't write a rant. I didn't post the screenshots of the cheating texts or the bank statements. I wrote a single post on my personal blog, which I linked to my social media. Title: The Price of Admission. For a long time, I thought the cost of a good life was silence. I thought that if I smiled enough, worked hard enough, and forgave enough, I would earn my place at the table. Last Saturday, I learned that some tables aren't worth sitting at. I was assaulted by a man I used to love in front of a family I tried to save. I am sharing this not to destroy them, they are doing a fine job of that themselves, but to free myself. Abuse thrives in the quiet. It relies on the victim being too embarrassed to speak. I am not embarrassed. I am bruised, I am heartbroken, and I am grieving the loss of people who are still alive. But I am not quiet. To anyone else who is being told to keep the peace at the expense of their safety, war is better than a peace that kills you. I hit publish. Within minutes, the shares started. Not just the gossip mongers this time, but real people sharing their own stories. The narrative shifted from, "Look at this drama," to "Look at this bravery." I closed my laptop. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my floor. I was alone. I had no fiancé, no family, and a legal battle on the horizon. My face hurt. My heart hurt. But for the first time in my life, the air in the room belonged entirely to me. I took a deep breath, and it didn't rattle in my chest. I was standing in the ashes, yes. But the fire was out. 10 months later, the season had turned. The humidity of that awful summer had long since given way to a crisp, biting autumn, and now we were settling into a thaw that felt like a genuine beginning. I drove past the house in Silver Creek last week. I didn't mean to. I was taking a detour to avoid construction on the turnpike, and habit pulled the steering wheel toward the old neighborhood. It looked different. The manicured lawn was a little overgrown, the edges blurring into the sidewalk. The white pillars that had once seemed so imposing now just looked like painted wood in need of a power wash. But the biggest change was the sign planted in the center of the grass: sold. Not by a luxury realtor, but by a bank liquidation firm. My parents hadn't just downsized, they had capitulated. The investigation I had sparked with my outburst at the engagement party didn't send anyone to prison. White-collar crime in this country is rarely punished with bars when a settlement check can be written, but it had bled them dry. The legal fees, the penalties for the irregularities in Dad's business filings, and the loss of investors had dismantled the empire. They were living in a 2-bedroom condo on the other side of town now. I knew this not because they told me, but because the grapevine in a small city is faster than fiber optics. The silence between us was no longer a weapon they used to punish me. It was a fortress I had built to protect myself. I hadn't spoken to my father since the cease and desist letter. I hadn't spoken to my mother since she left a voicemail blaming me for the foreclosure. It hurt, of course. There is a specific kind of grief reserved for the living, a phantom limb pain where your family used to be. I missed the idea of them. I missed the Sunday dinners before the money got tight. I missed the version of my mother who bought me ice cream when I scraped my knee before she decided my role was to be the family's shock absorber. But I didn't miss the reality. I didn't miss the suffocation. As for the happy couple, the fairy tale had rotted on the vine. Adam and Emily never made it to the altar. The pressure of the scandal, the loss of his job, he was quietly let go 2 weeks after the video went viral, and the realization that Emily came with debt, not a dowry, broke them. Adam moved back to Chicago alone, ostensibly to consult, but really to outrun his reputation. Emily was the one I worried about in the quiet moments of the night. She was back living with our parents in the condo, trapped in the wreckage of the life she had tried to steal. She texted me sometimes. Small testing messages. Saw a dog that looked like the one you wanted. Mom is having a hard day. I never replied. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. I knew that if I opened the door an inch, the draft would suck me back into their chaos. I wished her well, truly. But I had to wish her well from a distance that couldn't be bridged by a guilt trip. My life now looked nothing like the vision board my mother had curated for me. I wasn't a member of the country club. I wasn't driving a leased luxury SUV. I was living in a third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that my father would have called transitional, and I called alive. It was smaller, yes. The radiator clanked in the middle of the night, and I didn't have a dishwasher. But I paid the rent with my own money. Every square inch of that apartment was mine. I had quit the corporate job that made me feel like a cog and taken a position as a communications director for a nonprofit that helped women regain financial independence after domestic abuse. It paid less, but when I woke up in the morning, I didn't feel the crushing weight of dread on my chest. I had built a new circle, a chosen family, that felt more solid than the one I was born into. There was Sarah, of course, who had driven the getaway car. There was Maria from the support group. We did Sunday dinners now, but they were potlucks, with cheap wine and loud laughter, not interrogations about career advancement. I sat at my small kitchen table, adjusting the microphone on the boom arm. The red recording light hummed to life. This was the final piece of my reclamation. I had started a podcast 6 months ago, anonymously at first, then under my own name. It wasn't a revenge rant. It was a dissection of the cost of keeping the peace. It was about the American obsession with appearance over substance and the price women pay to maintain the facade of a happy family. Welcome back, I said, my voice steady in the headphones. It sounded deeper than it used to. It sounded like the voice of a woman who owns her history rather than one who is hiding from it. Today is the final episode of this season, and I want to talk about the concept of walking away. We are taught that loyalty is the highest virtue. We are taught that you don't turn your back on family. But what if the family has already turned their back on you? What if the price of admission to your own life is your self-respect? I paused, looking out the window. Down on the street, people were walking to the subway, living their messy, complicated lives. No one was performing. A year ago, I stood in a ballroom and let a man hit me because I thought I had to prove a point, I continued. I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was being excluded. I thought being uninvited was a death sentence. But I was wrong. Being invited to a table where you are on the menu, that is the death sentence. I touched my cheek. The bruise was long gone, faded into memory, but the lesson remained. I lost a lot to get here, I said into the mic. I lost my inheritance such as it was. I lost the approval of the people who raised me. I lost the future I thought I was supposed to want. But in the empty space where all of that used to be, I found something else. I found a life that actually fits me. I found out that I am not the structural support beam for a rotting house. I am the architect of my own. I leaned in closer to the microphone, visualizing them one last time. My father in his angry silence, my mother in her denial, Adam in his exile, Emily in her regret. I let them go. I unclenched the fist I had been holding in my chest for 29 years. They thought the worst thing I could do was show up at their party and scream the truth. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that I knew would resonate in thousands of earbuds. They were wrong. The worst thing I did for them was finally walk away. And I'm never looking back. I hit the stop button. The room was silent, but it wasn't empty. It was full of potential. I took the headphones off, stood up, and walked to the window. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the brick buildings. It wasn't the manicured gold of the country club. It was gritty and real and fleeting. I grabbed my coat. Sarah was meeting me for a drink in 20 minutes. I had a life to live, and for the first time in the history of Louise Jonathan, it belonged entirely to me. And with that, Louise steps away from the microphone and into the rest of her life, leaving the toxicity of the past behind. If you enjoyed this journey of reclaiming self-respect, please hit that subscribe button. Tell us below, do you think Louise should have forgiven her sister? We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.